Topic today is going to be optics and why I've landed on the optic that I ended up using most recently, and more than likely the one I'm probably going to stick with from here on out. The first time I started competing in the tactical games, there was a requirement that you had to use a 1x optic, and that was it. This is not the exact upper that I was using at the time. I borrowed my buddy's Garrison England. He let me borrow his gun because all I had set up at the time had variable optic powers on them. So what I used is the Spitfire AR without the flip up magnifier. So you may be looking at this thinking you can't use that with a Spitfire, and yes you can. It takes a little bit of setting up and adjusting, but you can absolutely use a magnifier with a Spitfire. The reason why I chose to go with the Spitfire at that time was it has a BDC turret on top. So according to the range, it takes chronographing your ammunition and understanding what the turret means and what the different numbers on it means. Once you've done all that legwork ahead of time, if there's a target 300, you can turn the dial to 3, bam, you're at 300 yards. As long as your ammunition, velocity, and BDC, everything lines up, you're good to go. Otherwise, what I have found is that in the Streetlock Pro app, the JM reticle that they have in there, the first line down, which is normally your 300 yard line in the BDC, matches up to the 3 on the turret. So if your ammunition, you can plug your ammunition details into Streetlock Pro, and if that first line, which is the 300 yard line, if that is 300 yards for you, then the 3 on this is going to be 300 yards for you as well, and the 4 will be 400, or whatever that 400 yard line is saying it is what the 4 on this will be. So that's what I started using. Loved it. Even after we switched to using variable power optics later on, I still stuck with this for quite a while. The next evolution that I went to was I added a 3x magnifier. The reason why I did that is they extended the range from, I believe the furthest target we had shot at was like 225 or 230, and they went from there to saying that 300 yard targets were available. So then I put the 3x magnifier on there just so that I was aiming at a precise spot on the target instead of just aiming at the head of the target. Anyway, this is what I started out with. First I started out with the 1x, then I added the flip up magnifier. Then I went to the 1 to 10, and this is what I most recently used. This is the same gun I most recently used in Utah. The reason why I went to the 1 to 10 is I knew going in, I had been a match director the year before in Utah, and Jake was the match director when I was competing in Utah, and I knew that there was a possibility there to have longer range shooting. So I wanted to have more power or more magnification on the scope. And also we had begun shooting out to 350, 400 yards in the past, and I really that's where I can separate myself a lot of times in the competition. So I like being able to take advantage of the more magnification. I always shoot, I never go above about 6 or 7 on the magnification, even though it goes up to 10. So some people may have questions, why aren't you using a 1 to 6? Because it's cheaper, it might be a little bit lighter. I don't think it is. Well, the reason being is when you're on 6 on a 1 to 10 optic, you aren't maxed out. When you are on 6 on a 1 to 6 optic, you're obviously maxed out. So light transmission isn't as good, all that other stuff, and I can see the image that I'm looking through is more clear when I'm seeing it. So that's why I went with the 1 to 10 instead of the 1 to 6. I have 1 to 6s. I love the 1 to 6s. However, I also like the first focal plane, that it scales with what power you're on instead of the second focal plane. But the reasons why you would go back and forth, I've never competed with just a straight up red dot. I have an astigmatism, or a holographic sight. I have an astigmatism, and it just looks like a blurry mess to me. I mean, my friends will look through this thing and say it is super clear, it's awesome, I look through it and I see like a fuzzy dot in the center of a fuzzy ring, and it's ugly. So I don't use it. However, for some reason, when I do add a magnifier behind it, it clears up the front optic. And I don't know if it's because it has a diopter, so it messes, I can dial it in with my astigmatism or whatever. That helps. Another thing that helps is if you have pop-up sights. If you pop up your back sight behind it and look through the ring, it oftentimes will clear up the blurriness that your eye is causing. It's not the optic, it's definitely your eye. So the different reasons why I believe that new shooters should probably be coming in to the competition with a red dot sight. Now, why would you say that? It's like, man, the target's gonna be 350 yards, they're a newer shooter, they don't know how to, well, these scopes right here demand that you are in an eye box behind the scope. Newer shooters, the biggest thing that they struggle with is getting their eye in the position behind the scope where they can see the image through the scope. The more proficient shooters, more skilled shooters, it's natural. You fall in behind the scope, you can see it great, and you can get in awkward positions behind VTACs, under cars, whatever the situation may be, you can find that spot without even thinking about it. Whereas newer shooters will sit there for 45 seconds to a minute and a half, messing with their position, trying to get back behind the scope exactly right. And it ends up creating a lot of frustration. And I would not suggest a new shooter going into the competition with a magnified optic or an LPVO. What I would suggest for a newer shooter is absolutely a red dot. The reason being is that you do not have to be perfectly behind the gun to see the red dot. It's almost like a heads-up display. You look at the target, you put this in the way, and you're going to see all of it, put it together very quickly, and start shooting. So it takes away a lot of the stress of trying to find that perfect eye box behind the scope. Your transitions will be a lot quicker, things will be going a lot smoother, and for a lot of times a newer shooter is not going to have a ton of success at longer ranges anyway, which is where the LPVO starts coming in. And it's also the transitions is where they're going to lose, a newer shooter will lose a lot of time behind a LPVO. That's why I would suggest a red dot for a brand new shooter. Once you have been shooting for a little while and you're becoming more proficient, you can find an eye box behind a scope. The next progression I would make is to add a 3x magnifier. Why is that? Because then you can still, if you're still a little awkward with your transitions on VTACs and unconventional positions shooting your gun, you can flip it out of the way and find your red dot super fast and start getting shots downrange on target a lot quicker. Then when the opportunity presents itself, if you're shooting to 300, 350 yards, you can flip over your magnifier, and then you'll have a bigger, you'll have a magnified picture of what you're looking at. Then the red dot is still usable at that point. At 300 yards with most 5.56 or 2.23 rounds, you aim at the head of an AC zone or the head of an full IPSC target, and the bullet will drop into the body of the target. And that's as accurate as you're probably going to be anyway if you're a newer shooter. So this gives you a little bit bigger target to aim at, and is a forgiving setup. Now, if you're like me and you have a little bit of an astigmatism, I would say that this is probably the best setup. This has an etched reticle in it, and an etched reticle does not affect an astigmatism. So you get a crisp view of the reticle and a crisp view of the target. And the same thing with the 3x magnifier. Whenever you start getting out the range, it helps a lot. Now, this is a pretty inexpensive optic. It's about 180 bucks anywhere you find it. And it's a Spitfire AR 1X. This thing will do everything that you need it to do. I've won the Elite Division with it 5 or 6 times. It's all that you need. I'm fully confident that I could go back to it and use it and win again. It's just the 110 offers a little bit more, and I'm looking for any bit of advantage I can get. So this one will probably carry you a little bit further in your shooting journey than a red dot will, and it is quite a bit cheaper than the Huey is. So the reason why this will take you a little bit further is as you become a better shooter and you start understanding, how to chronograph your gun to get the bullet speeds, what ballistic coefficients do, and how to match that up with your ballistic turret. And they also send it, I think, with an MOA turret. You can start dialing for distance. So if there is a 400-yard target, you can dial to 400 yards, put the reticle exactly on the target with your 3x magnifier, and get shots on target really quick. The only thing where it gets kind of hairy is when you have to start holding off for wind. If there's 10, 15 mile an hour winds, there's ways that you can adjust for wind, but that starts getting even a little bit more complicated with ballistics. So I would suggest this to take you as far into your shooting journey as you can get if you're a newer shooter, and even new to competition. If you've been around guns your whole life, you've been hunting, but you haven't been doing this kind of shooting, I would still start with either a red dot or the Spitfire AR. Then what I believe that the more advanced shooters should be shooting, so you've got a couple competitions under your belt, or you have been a competition shooter in the past and you're looking to compete in the tactical games, then definitely start looking at an LPVO. So this has a pretty close, if not a perfect 1X, like a true 1X on it. You still have to be in the eye box behind it, but it's a very forgiving eye box. And then it also allows you to go up to 5, 6, 7 power when the targets start getting out to 350, 400 yards. And I prefer on this the MOA reticle because it follows the JM reticle BDC, which my ammo lines up with really well, and I've been shooting it in 3-gun for a long time with the 1-6. And it also has windage dots out in the tree, so that way there's a point of reference and you're not just aiming out in no man's land. So that's why I like using the 1-10, and that's why I am probably going to be settling and using this from now on. If you have any questions about any of that, I know it's kind of a quick run through of why I'm using what I'm using, what I've used in the past, and why. But this is as much of a description as I can give and an honest review what I can give. If you're just now coming into the sport, I would definitely suggest you just stick with the 1X Spitfire AR. You're going to be giving up a little bit at distance, but like I said, I shot this at the championship. I think I dropped one shot on the 400-yard target or 350, whatever it was, using a 1X. It was completely fine. I was totally confident in what I was doing, and you can take this as far as you want to take it. But if you're just getting into the sport and you don't want to drop a ton of money on a Razor 1-10, this is definitely a great place to start at a good price range. The way that you can get these two guys to work together is, first what you have to do is you have to establish how far the 3X has to be, and it's different for each individual from what I've seen. Some people need a little bit bigger gap. They have to mount the 3X a little further back. Some of it, like mine, is almost butted up next to each other. Then you have to flip it off to the side and you find the diopter setting that works great for you on your 1X scope. Once you find that, you flip your 3X over, then you use the 3X diopter to focus in through the 1X, and then you're good to go. You can start competing with it. And it definitely works. I've used it. I've won with it. I know it says not to do it in the owner's manual, but 100% works. And a lot of my friends ended up using it as well. It worked for them. So it definitely works. It just takes some doing to get it all set up. But once it's all set up, you don't have to touch it again. Other than that, next I'll probably be doing a video on barrel length and the different barrel lengths I've used and why I've settled with where I'm at, and probably not going to change for a while after I make my last move. But if you have any other videos that you'd like to see, just drop it down in the comments and I will try to make more videos.